The sheriff lay dead in the dust. One bullet at sunrise ended 15 years of hunting. But Daniel Cross's revenge was just beginning. The man he killed was only a puppet, and the strings led to men in suits hundreds of miles away. Men who thought money could buy them safety from a ghost who'd already lost everything. What's the saying? Oh, well, howdy, stranger. Old Jack at your service, though the only service I've got is flapping my gums and telling you're here to hear a story. So lean in. The body of Sheriff Marcus Brennan was carried to the undertakers by his stunned deputies, neither of whom seemed to know how to process what had just happened. Their boss, the man who'd run Copper Valley with an iron fist for 2 decades, lay dead in the street, killed in a fair duel by a ghost from the past. The established order had collapsed in the span of a single gunshot. Daniel holstered his weapon and walked to where Rebecca Coleman's folder lay on the dusty ground. He picked it up carefully, brushing off the dirt, then looked at the crowd that had gathered around them in a loose circle. Dozens of faces, some familiar from 15 years ago, others belonging to newer residents who'd moved to Copper Valley after his tragedy. "I need to tell you all something," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly despite the low volume. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for explanation. What happened here this morning wasn't murder. It was justice, and it's time you all understood why. Thomas Wright stepped forward. Let him speak in the town hall. This deserves to be done proper, with witnesses and records. Within the hour, nearly everyone in Copper Valley had crowded into the wooden building that served as town hall, courtroom, and church depending on the day. Daniel stood at the front, the recovered journal and Rebecca's folder spread on the table before him. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear or doubt, but from exhaustion and the weight of finally being able to tell the truth. 15 years ago, Daniel began, my wife Sarah and my daughter Emma were murdered in our home. The official investigation concluded it was a robbery, but it wasn't. It was an execution ordered by Marcus Brennan. The crowd erupted in whispers and protests. Daniel waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Brennan wanted my land for the railroad. I refused to sell, so he hired 3 of his most trusted men, Tom Hawkins, Bill Fletcher, and Sam Delaney, to kill my family and make it look like a random crime. Daniel's voice remained steady, though his jaw was tight. This journal, kept by Hawkins, documents that job and many others. Brennan ran a systematic operation of murder and intimidation for years, targeting anyone who stood in the way of his financial interests. He held up the journal, showing pages covered in cramped handwriting. Hawkins kept detailed records, dates, amounts paid, names of victims. He wrote it all down, probably as insurance against Brennan betraying him someday. Thomas Wright stood. I've examined that journal. The handwriting matches samples we have from Hawkins and old jail records. It's genuine. Rebecca Coleman rose next. My father, James Coleman, and my family were killed 6 years ago in what was ruled an accidental fire. But they were Brennan's next target after the Cross family. She held up her folder. I've spent 6 years collecting evidence. Property transfer records show a pattern. Anyone who refused to sell land to the railroad consortium ended up dead within months. And in every case, Brennan either bought the property himself or received substantial payments from the railroad company. A man in the back stood up, Benjamin Reeves. Daniel recognized him as a merchant who'd been in Copper Valley for decades. Are you saying Sheriff Brennan killed multiple families? How many? At least 7 that we can document, Rebecca replied. Probably more. The Cross family, my family, the Colemans, the Martinez family in 72, the Whitmore family in 74, the Johnson family in 76, the Schmidt family in 78, the Anderson family in 81. All of them owned land the railroad wanted. All of them refused to sell. All of them died in circumstances ruled accidental or criminal, but unsolved. The crowd's whispers had turned to shocked murmurs. People were beginning to remember those deaths, beginning to see the pattern they'd missed before. Daniel continued, I spent 15 years tracking down the 3 men who killed my family. Tom Hawkins in Arizona, Bill Fletcher in California, Sam Delaney in Colorado. before they died. Each one confirmed Brennan's involvement. Each one gave me pieces of the full picture. "You killed them," someone shouted. "That makes you a murderer too." "I executed 3 men who murdered innocent women and children," Daniel replied without flinching. "Yes, I killed them, and I'd do it again. Because the law wouldn't. The law protected them, protected Brennan, protected the railroad's money over human lives." A woman near the front, Martha Henderson, who ran the general store, stood with tears streaming down her face. "My sister was married to James Coleman. She died in that fire with her whole family. My nieces were 8 and 10 years old." She looked around at the crowd. If what they're saying is true, then Brennan murdered 7 families, dozens of people, and we all just accepted it. We believed the lies. The weight of collective guilt settled over the room like a shroud. These weren't strangers who died. They'd been neighbors, friends, community members, and the town had failed them all. One of Brennan's deputies, a young man named Jack Morrison, stood reluctantly. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. The sheriff, he seemed like a hard man but fair. He talked about keeping the peace, protecting the town." His voice broke. "How could we not see it?" "Because he was good at hiding it," Thomas Wright said quietly. "Because he had authority, and we're trained to trust authority. Because the crime seemed random, spread out over years." He looked at Daniel, and because men like Cross, who knew the truth or suspected it, were dismissed as crazy with grief. Daniel nodded slowly. "For years, I was just a mad widower who couldn't accept that his family died in a random crime. People pitied me, but didn't listen. Even when I tried to tell the marshal, tried to point out the inconsistencies, I was told I was seeing conspiracies where there was only tragedy." "So what happens now?" Benjamin Reeves asked. "Brennan's dead. His hired killers are dead. Who answers for all of this?" "The railroad company," Rebecca said firmly. "The consortium that paid Brennan to clear the land. We have enough evidence to tie them to at least some of the murders. They need to face justice, legal justice." Wright stood again. "I'll take this to the territorial governor myself. This evidence, these testimonies, it's enough to launch a proper investigation. The railroad executives who knew what Brennan was doing, who profited from these murders, they'll hang." But would they? Daniel wondered silently. Men with that kind of money and power rarely faced real consequences. They hire lawyers, delay trials, find scapegoats. The wheels of legal justice ground slowly, and often the truly guilty escaped through loopholes and corruption. Still, it was better than nothing. It was more than the victims had gotten before. The meeting continued for hours as people came forward with their own stories, their own suspicions about Brennan they'd never voiced. Slowly, painfully, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. Copper Valley had been systematically bled by its own sheriff, its safety and trust betrayed by the man sworn to protect it. By the time the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the town hall windows, a rough plan had formed. Wright would take the evidence to the territorial capital. Rebecca would testify about her family. Daniel would provide his testimony about the 3 killers and what they confessed. Other families who'd lost members would come forward with their own suspicious circumstances. It wouldn't bring back the dead. It wouldn't undo the years of pain and grief, but it was accountability. It was truth being spoken in a place that had lived with lies for too long. As the crowd dispersed, people approached Daniel individually, some to apologize for not believing him years ago, some to thank him for bringing the truth to light, some simply to shake his hand in silent understanding of what he'd lost and what he'd done to avenge it. Martha Henderson hugged him tightly, sobbing. "Thank you. Thank you for not letting them get away with it. My sister, her babies, they didn't die for nothing now. The truth is out." Daniel accepted the gratitude awkwardly, uncomfortable with being seen as a hero. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left except the need to make the guilty pay. As night fell on Copper Valley, Daniel stood alone in the street where he'd killed Brennan that morning. The bloodstain was still visible in the dust, dark and accusatory. He thought about Sarah and Emma, wondered if they knew somehow that justice had been served, wondered if they'd forgive him for taking so long, for letting grief and rage consume 15 years of his life. They'd be proud of you, a voice said behind him. Daniel turned to find Rebecca Coleman standing there, backlit by lamplight from the hotel. Would they? He asked quietly. I became a killer for them. A man who hunted other men across 3 territories and put bullets in them. Is that what a husband and father should become? You became what you needed to be, Rebecca replied. You didn't choose this path. Brennan chose it for you when he murdered your family. You just walked it to the end. And now, Daniel looked at the empty street, the quiet town. What do I do now that it's over? Rebecca stepped closer. You live. You help make sure this evidence reaches the right people. You testify. You make certain that every person who died gets their name spoken in court and their story told. She paused. And maybe eventually, you find a way to be more than just grief and vengeance. Daniel looked at this young woman who'd spent 6 years of her life seeking justice for her own murdered family. She understood him in a way few people could. They were both survivors of the same conspiracy, both driven by the need to expose the truth. Tomorrow, Daniel said, I'm riding with Wright to the territorial capital. Will you come? Try to stop me, Rebecca replied with a fierce smile. As they stood together in the darkness, 2 ghosts who'd refused to fade away, Copper Valley began the long process of healing from wounds it hadn't known it carried. The truth was out now, spreading like light through shadows. And sometimes, Daniel thought, that was its own kind of justice. The journey to the territorial capital took 8 days, by horse and wagon. Thomas Wright, Daniel Cross, and Rebecca Coleman traveled together, joined by Martha Henderson and 2 other family members of Brennan's victims who wanted to see justice done. The leather journal and Rebecca's collected documents rode in a locked metal box that Wright kept chained to his person even while sleeping. The landscape they crossed was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Endless stretches of desert punctuated by rocky mesas, dried riverbeds that only ran during the brief rainy season, and distant mountains that seemed to float on the horizon like mirages. It was the kind of terrain that had defined the American frontier, vast, unforgiving, and indifferent to human suffering. During the long days in the saddle, Daniel found himself talking to Rebecca more than he'd talked to anyone in years. She had a sharp mind and a determination that reminded him of Sarah, though their personalities were different. Where Sarah had been warm and nurturing, Rebecca burned with controlled fury, channeling her grief into methodical documentation and preparation. When did you start collecting the evidence? Daniel asked her one evening as they made camp in the lee of a large boulder formation. The day after my family died, Rebecca replied, stirring the campfire with a stick. I was 16. They sent me to live with my aunt in town, and everyone kept telling me it was an accident, that I needed to accept it and move on, but I couldn't. Her eyes reflected the firelight, hard and determined. I knew my father. He was meticulous about safety. He would never have let a lamp fall or allowed bad oil anywhere near the house. So I started asking questions. And people thought you were crazy with grief, Daniel said softly, just like they thought about you. She looked at him across the flames. Funny how when you refuse to accept comfortable lies, people decide you're the problem. Right, listening from where he was checking his horse's hooves, spoke up. The truth is uncomfortable. It means admitting we all failed, that we didn't protect people we should have protected. Easier to believe in accidents and random violence than face the rot in our own community. Will it be different now? Martha Henderson asked. She was a worn woman in her 50s, made older by grief and years of hard frontier living. Will the governor actually do something? Or will the railroad's money buy them out of trouble? I won't lie to you, Wright said. Men with that kind of wealth and power have ways of escaping justice, but we have something they can't buy or threaten away. We have the truth, documented and witnessed. At minimum, their reputations will be destroyed. Their business relationships will suffer. And if we're lucky, some of them will hang. If we're lucky, Rebecca repeated bitterly. My family's dead. The Cross family's dead. 6 other families are dead. And the best we can hope for is that backslash, if we're lucky backslash, some rich men might face consequences. The frustration in her voice echoed what they were all feeling. The frontier had its own justice, swift, brutal, and direct. But the civilized world they were entering operated differently, with lawyers and courts and endless delays that favored those with money to spend on defense. "We have to try," Daniel said quietly. "For years, I thought the only justice was the kind I delivered personally, with a gun. But that just created more bodies, more graves. Maybe legal justice is slow and imperfect, but it's the only way to break the cycle." On the 5th day, they encountered a group of railroad surveyors working on mapping the extended route through the territories. The men were camped near a dry creek bed, their equipment spread out under canvas tarps. When they spotted Wright's party approaching, several of them reached for rifles before recognizing the former marshal. "Easy, boys," Wright called out. "We're just passing through." The survey crew's leader, a thin man with a sunburned face and measuring equipment hanging from his belt, stepped forward cautiously. "Marshal Wright? Heard you retired." "I did. This is personal business." Wright gestured to his companions. "We're headed to see the governor." Must be important business to make that trip. The surveyor's eyes lingered on Rebecca and Martha, curiosity evident. "Anything we should know about?" Daniel spoke up before Wright could answer. "You work for the Central Pacific Railroad Consortium?" "We do." "Why? Then you might want to find new employment," Daniel said flatly, "before the legal trouble starts." The surveyor's expression shifted to confusion, then concern. "What legal trouble?" "The kind that comes from paying a corrupt sheriff to murder families who won't sell their land," Rebecca said coldly. "The kind that ends with executives in prison and company assets seized." The surveyor paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe you don't," Wright interrupted. "Maybe you're just honest men doing honest work. But the people who hired you, the executives running your consortium, they knew. They paid Sheriff Marcus Brennan to commit murders. We have evidence, witnesses, documents, and we're taking it all to the territorial governor." The survey crew exchanged nervous glances. Their leader licked his lips. "Brennan's dead. Heard about that. Killed in a duel a week back." "By me," Daniel said, "after he murdered my wife and daughter 15 years ago." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. These men were just workers, probably innocent of any conspiracy. But their employers' actions would likely destroy the company and their jobs with it. "If I were you," Wright said more gently, "I'd start looking for work with other railroad companies. This one won't survive what's coming." As they rode away from the stunned survey crew, Martha spoke quietly. "Did you see their faces? They had no idea." "Most people involved in evil don't," Rebecca replied. "They just follow orders, collect wages, and never ask where the money comes from or why certain obstacles keep disappearing." The territorial capital appeared on the 8th day, rising from the desert like a monument to human ambition. It was a real city compared to places like Copper Valley, multi-story buildings, paved streets, gas lights, and a population in the thousands rather than hundreds. The governor's mansion sat on a hill overlooking the main street, a white-painted structure with columns and a well-maintained garden that seemed almost obscene in its luxury compared to the hardscrabble towns they'd traveled through. Wright led them directly there, using his former position as marshal to gain an immediate audience. They were kept waiting for 2 hours in an anteroom while bureaucrats shuffled papers and made them feel appropriately insignificant. But eventually, they were ushered into Governor William Harrison's office. Harrison was a heavy-set man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and the carefully neutral expression of a career politician. He sat behind an enormous oak desk covered in documents, a glass of whiskey at his elbow despite the early hour. "Marshal Wright," Harrison said, not rising. "Or former Marshal Wright, I should say. I understood you retired." "I did, Governor, but this matter required my personal attention." Wright placed the metal box on the desk with a heavy thunk. "We have evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving multiple murders, corruption, and corporate malfeasance. It requires your immediate investigation. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a claim. Who exactly are you accusing? Sheriff Marcus Brennan of Copper Valley, deceased. 3 of his deputies, also deceased. And executives of the Central Pacific Railroad Consortium, who paid Brennan to murder anyone who wouldn't sell them land. Wright opened the box and began laying out documents. We have a journal kept by one of Brennan's killers, property records, witness testimony, physical evidence. This is real, Governor, and it's been happening for at least 15 years. For the next 3 hours, they presented their case. Daniel told a story, his voice steady as he recounted finding his wife and daughter's bodies, the investigation that went nowhere, his 15-year hunt for the truth. Rebecca presented her meticulously organized evidence, walking the governor through patterns of property seizures and mysterious deaths. Martha and the other family members testified about their own losses. Wright presented the journal, letting Harrison read selected passages that detailed payments, orders, and methods of murder. The former marshal's credibility lent weight to everything else. This wasn't just grieving families seeing conspiracies. This was a respected lawman presenting documented evidence. By the time they finished, Harrison's neutral expression had cracked. He looked genuinely disturbed, his whiskey forgotten. He paused, searching for words. This is monstrous. If even half of what you're presenting is accurate, it represents one of the worst criminal conspiracies in the territory's history. It's all accurate, Daniel said flatly. I can take you to the graves if you need proof. Harrison stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city. You understand what you're asking me to do. The Central Pacific Railroad Consortium is one of the most powerful companies in the West. They have connections in Washington, investors in New York and San Francisco. Going after them will create enemies in very high places. Are you saying you won't investigate? Rebecca's voice carried barely controlled fury. I'm saying it will be difficult and dangerous. Harrison turned back to face them. But yes, I'll investigate. I'll impanel a grand jury, issue subpoenas for the railroad's records, and have federal marshals begin interviewing everyone involved. He paused. However, I need you all to understand something. This will take time. Months, possibly years. And the outcome isn't guaranteed. These companies have the best lawyers money can buy. We understand, Wright said, but at least the truth will be spoken in open court. These families will have their day. Harrison nodded slowly. Give me 2 weeks to prepare the groundwork. I'll need all of you to stay in the Capitol to provide testimony when the grand jury convenes. Can you do that? They agreed, though Daniel could see the frustration on everyone's faces. 2 weeks of waiting, then months of legal proceedings. Justice moved slowly in the civilized world. As they left the governor's mansion, Rebecca kicked at a stone in frustration. 2 weeks, then months of trials. Meanwhile, the railroad executives are probably already destroying evidence and bribing witnesses. Probably, Wright agreed. But we started something today. The wheels are turning, even if they turn slowly. Daniel looked back at the white mansion on the hill, thinking about the contrast between frontier justice and legal justice. One was swift but brutal, often hitting the wrong targets. The other was methodical but painfully slow, and the guilty often escaped through technicalities and corruption. Neither system was perfect, but together, maybe they could achieve something neither could alone. The ghost had returned and delivered swift justice to Brennan. Now the law would pursue the larger conspiracy. The men in suits who'd ordered the murders from comfortable offices hundreds of miles away. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales for all the innocent lives lost. But it was something. And sometimes, on the frontier, something was all you could hope for. 6 months later, Daniel Cross stood in the cemetery outside Copper Valley, looking at 3 graves. He'd had proper headstones installed, white marble carved with roses and angels, the kind of memorial Sarah and Emma deserved. Next to them was a 3rd stone, freshly placed, bearing the names of the Coleman family. The grand jury had returned indictments against 7 executives of the Central Pacific Railroad Consortium. 3 had fled to Europe. 2 were awaiting trial in federal prison. The other 2 had committed suicide rather than face prosecution. The company itself was being dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the victims' families. It wasn't complete justice. Some of the guilty had escaped, and no amount of money could bring back the dead. But it was more than anyone had expected. Governor Harrison had proven surprisingly tenacious, perhaps sensing that this case could make his political career. The newspapers had seized on the story, turning it into a national scandal that couldn't be swept under the rug. Rebecca Coleman stood beside Daniel, laying flowers on her family's grave. She testified at every hearing, her detailed records proving crucial to the prosecution. The experience had changed her. She seemed older, tired, but also somehow more at peace. "Do you think they know?" she asked quietly. "Your family, mine. Do you think they know what we did?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "I'd like to think so. I'd like to think Sarah and Emma are somewhere watching, and that they understand why it took so long." Martha Henderson approached, carrying her own flowers. "The trial starts next month for the 2 executives still in custody. The prosecutor says it's a strong case. They expect convictions." "Good," Rebecca said simply. They stood in silence for a while, 3 people bound by grief and the shared burden of seeking justice. Around them, the cemetery was peaceful, shaded by cottonwood trees and surrounded by the open prairie. It was a good place for the dead to rest, better than they deserved given how they died. "What will you do now?" Martha asked Daniel. "Stay in Copper Valley?" Daniel shook his head. "No, too many ghosts here, and not the kind that need avenging anymore. Just memories." He looked at the graves. "I thought I'd head north. Montana maybe, or Wyoming. Find some land, build something small. Not a ranch. I'm done with ranching. Maybe just a cabin, a quiet place." "Running away?" Rebecca asked, though her tone wasn't judgmental. "No, moving forward. There's a difference." Daniel touched Emma's headstone gently. "I spent 15 years living in the past, consumed by grief and rage. It was necessary, but it cost me everything else I might have been. Now I want to try living in the present for a while. See what that's like." "I'm thinking of becoming a lawyer," Rebecca said suddenly. Both Daniel and Martha looked at her in surprise. "I'm serious. I want to help other people the way we helped each other. Make sure families who lose someone to violence or corruption have someone who knows how to navigate the legal system." "You'd be good at it," Daniel said sincerely. "You're meticulous, determined, and you actually care about justice rather than just winning." Martha smiled sadly. "I'm too old to start over. I'll stay in Copper Valley, keep running my store. But at least now I can do it without wondering if the sheriff is going to have me killed for refusing to sell my property." The town had elected a new sheriff, a young deputy who'd been horrified to learn about Brennan's crimes and determined to restore integrity to the position. Copper Valley was healing, slowly, learning to trust authority again. It would take time, maybe a generation, but it was happening. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Daniel paused for one final look at his family's graves. "I'm sorry it took so long," he whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you. But I promise you, I did everything I could to make it right. And now I'm going to try to live the kind of life you would have wanted for me. Not consumed by revenge, but actually living." That evening, Daniel packed his few possessions onto his horse and prepared to leave Copper Valley for the last time. The town had thrown a small gathering in his honor, awkwardly trying to celebrate the man who'd exposed their darkest secrets. He'd attended out of politeness, accepted their thanks and well wishes, but couldn't wait to be on the road again. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Rebecca found him checking his saddle one last time. "I wanted to give you something before you leave," she said, holding out a small leather-bound book. "It's a journal. I thought maybe you could start writing your own story instead of living in someone else's tragedy." Daniel took the journal, feeling its weight in his hands. The pages were blank, a future waiting to be written. "Thank you," he said quietly. I'll try. Don't try. Just do it. Rebecca smiled, though tears shimmered in her eyes. You gave me justice for my family. You gave this whole town a chance to face the truth. Now give yourself permission to be more than just a ghost who came back for revenge. They embraced briefly, two survivors acknowledging what they'd been through together. Then Daniel mounted his horse and rode out of Copper Valley as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. He didn't look back. There was nothing behind him now except graves and memories. Ahead lay open country, new territories, and the possibility of becoming someone other than Daniel Cross, the man who'd lost everything. Maybe he'd never completely heal. Maybe the grief and guilt would follow him forever like shadows. But at least now he could walk forward into sunlight instead of dwelling in darkness. The ghost had returned to Copper Valley and delivered justice. Now the man could leave and try to find peace. As he rode through the night, Daniel opened Rebecca's journal and wrote his first entry by the light of a campfire. My name is Daniel Cross. 15 years ago, I lost my family to greed and corruption. I spent those years hunting the men responsible, becoming something dark and hard and focused only on vengeance. Today, that chapter ends. Tomorrow, I begin writing a new one. I don't know what it will contain. Redemption, peace, purpose, or just quiet survival. But it will be mine to write, not dictated by grief and rage. Sarah Emma, if you're watching from wherever the dead go, know that I loved you, that I avenged you, and that I'm finally ready to live again instead of just existing in the shadow of your deaths. This is my promise to you. I will try to become the man you believed I was, the man I was before tragedy changed me. I will try to find joy again, or at least contentment. I will try to help others instead of just hunting enemies. I will try to live. Daniel closed the journal and stared into the flames. The night was quiet except for the crackle of burning wood and the distant howl of coyotes. He felt lighter somehow, as if speaking those words, even just writing them, had released some of the weight he'd carried for so long. The frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. But for the first time in 15 years, Daniel Cross looked at that vastness and felt something other than emptiness. He felt hope, and that, he thought, was its own kind of justice, the kind that came not from bullets and graves, but from refusing to let evil destroy everything good about being human. The ghost had returned. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.